There we go.
Yeah, there it is. There it is.
Press the button.
Hello, everyone. So now, I'm with Andrew once again. So, Andrew was with me to do
can't
some...
keep me away.
Hannah, no, it's good. It's good. We're getting the chance to do some Illich. Andrew was with me to talk about Hannah Arendt, and now we're back here to do some Illich. So kind of polar opposites. But before we get into this, Andrew, what do you do?
Well, I would disagree with the comment about polar opposites. Do you know Ray Brazier? Ray Brazier did a piece on Prometheanism, and he was talking about these different thinkers who regard the human condition as finite, and he brought Arendt and Illich together.
Oh, really?
Along with some Heidegger too.
See, because I was under the impression that not many people took up Illich in any kind of academic way, really.
It is strange every now and again he pops up.
Yeah.
Which I think is fascinating. I think everyone who reads him takes him seriously, but not many people read him because he never became part of the canon.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but
yeah.
Part of my interest in Illich nowadays comes from my dissertation topic on Simone Weil on intellectual leprosy, the idea that she elaborated on the abolition of all political parties. And in that essay, she mentions how a kind of binary form of thinking for or against an idea, has snuck into education. So at the moment, I am concentrating on opposing the theory of a liberal arts education with critical pedagogy, and one of the thinkers of critical pedagogy that I'm dealing with is Ivan Illich, along with Paulo Freire, with whom Illich did a lot of work in South America. So that's where my current interest in Illich lies. But we both have kind of very intriguing origin stories with our interest in Illich.
Yes, we do.
And how he ended up on our bookshelves.
Yes. And really, one of the most striking things is that Illich is just a little bit of a rare read. And I happened to stumble upon him by having him assigned to me about, what year are we? 2018?
2018.
Probably about 2011 in Montreal when I was doing school there. And then, yeah, it just kind of snowballed. I know that it was a pretty difficult text to read at the time, but I remember at the time having problems with it personally, but now having the chance to come back to it, I've had the opportunity to rethink some of my initial assessments. But you have, I know you mentioned this before, but you have a very interesting semi-anecdote about Illich.
Indeed. Well, I for my masters, I was taught by Barry Sanders. I worked with him very closely. He's a medievalist and historian of ideas, and he met Illich sometime in the 80s or 90s, and they decided to collaborate together on a book called ABC, the Alphabetization of the Popular Mind, which was all about the shift in medievalism from oral culture to literate culture, and how that affects the way we think about ourselves today. So he would often rave about Illich, and he seemed like quite a character. And before his death, Ivan Illich's death, he suffered from brain cancer, I think, and if you're familiar with Illich's work, you would know you know that he wrote Medical Nemesis, which was this critique of the medical establishment in the same way that he critiques the establishment of schools and Deschooling Society. So he refused to go to typical Western doctor to have the tumor in his on his brain surgically removed.
And it manifested itself on his face.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, it was very visible. And Barry told me about the story of when Illich came to Claremont to give a talk with Barry, because they often give talks together. And one of Barry's colleagues went over to Illich and said, "Man, you've got to get that tumor in your head checked out." And Illich just apparently just reached over to him, took him by the shoulder and said, "The difference between you and me, my friend, is that you can see my mortality, but I cannot see yours."
Yeah,
that's just like, and that's very typical of Illich's writing style too, because there are moments in Deschooling Society definitely where he makes these very bold statements, I guess, but not in the sense of like in the sense of outrageous statements. But he was trained as a priest as a child.
That's true.
When he's making these pronouncements, he has a kind of scriptural quality. They have a scriptural quality to them.
Yeah,
and he's like, he was deeply knowledgeable about other languages as well. So when he's using words, he knows the etymological history of all words. So he's very careful about the way he chooses them, and he knows how to turn a phrase in a way that has like the right rhythm and impact.
Yeah, he does come off like he's an English writer, and what I mean by that is that he does appear to really be a kind of analytic thinker. In that this is that easily digestible. Not that the ideas are, but that his writing style is clear, which is something I wouldn't say is indicative of other writers of the 1970s, especially those coming out of continental philosophy. So I don't know, for your own part, why was his work accessible, if I could even say that?
Because it's coming out of his experience as a teacher. He also worked with Paulo Freire in South America. And he talks about in the introduction before the chapter of "We Must Disestablish School." He's talking about the experiences that influenced him for the book. Of his meeting Everett Raymer. They're talking a lot to one another. This experience of meeting him influenced his. Let me rephrase that. Meeting Everett Raymer inspired him to question the value of extending obligatory schooling to all people. They meet regularly at the Center for Intercultural Documentation in Mexico. There are people at the center who are encouraging Illich to test his ideas on education against the experience of people in Latin America and Africa. And he just lists a bunch of people who have influenced him throughout this entire project, which goes from Paulo Freire, who I've mentioned, Peter Berger, Jose Maria Bulnes, as well as Joseph Fitzpatrick, Jonathan Holt, Angel Quintero, and on and on and on. So this is a book that comes out of countless conversations and countless talks that other people have given. So I think that it is not a product of someone who's been sitting in their study and pondering this question for months and months. It's someone who's actually elaborated these ideas in front of other people and been challenged, and from that interaction has been able to sharpen the analysis, and also compare that analysis to the experience of people who are actually trying to embark on a critical pedagogical project.
Yeah, I think you're really right about that. In that there is the meeting of praxis and theory. Like, he was going to all of these different conferences, all of these different kind of international meetings with political leaders and intellectuals and whatever to talk about this very issue, which centers around the question: should we dismantle school, or should we disestablish school? To which the answer is quite simple for him: yes, but why? And how? So I guess if we move through this methodically, we would get, the first point from the first chapter, why must we disestablish school?
Mm-hmm.
So one of the first points he really makes is that the school teaches people to confuse process and substance. So they don't learn what they need to learn because they actually need to learn it. Rather, they get confused and instead become obsessed with the very procedure of the act of learning through a very regimented, mandated, controlled system, as opposed to the possibility of learning something that might be useful to them as just a starting point.
Well, certainly, and I think he expands his insight into a critique of institutionalized society as a whole, of people who are pressed into a position of dependence on institutions to make the decisions for them. And he talks about the modernization of poverty that would be exported to the continents of South America and Africa at this time, which stank of a Western sense of a sense of Western superiority.
Yeah,
and they supplied the Western nations supplied the money to these nations to create the similar kind of institutions that would be found in Europe or North America, which meant that people living in those nations suffered from a sense of psychological impotence, because all of a sudden they were placed in a economic and political situation where they were no longer allowed to autonomously decide what kinds of communities they wanted to live in, what kind of learning they wanted to engage in. And I think that for Illich, he's very conscious of how this dynamic has been expanded to all facets of society, and how, he talks about this later in the phenomenology of school, but how schooling is an attempt to inculcate this dependence on institutions on children, and prevent any independence or curiosity in the child.
Right.
Because if each morning where you wake up and go to school, what the stuff that you're learning is already being prepared by someone else, who is in charge, and you're no longer. Actually, let me rephrase that. You were never allowed responsibility for your own learning in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is my first concern with this. What might the alternative look like in your mind? And we'll get through it in his words, but right off the bat, from what you said, because in his words, the increasing reliance on institutional care adds a new dimension to their helplessness, psychological impotence, the inability to fend for themselves. Because I can hear resonating well with this are some kind of conservative sentiments about the welfare state and stuff like that.
Well, he brings up the welfare bureaucracies.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking at that point, oh, hang on, this can be co-opted into a project where conservatives could be like, well, we're just going to take away public funding of the schools because it's part of this kind of radical deschooling project, but that's without an adequate replacement. It's just the gutting out of social security.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, this is not in the sense that Illich is meaning, because he's writing in a time before neoliberalism really comes out as a dominant political force in North America and Europe and across the world, really. So when he's placing those criticisms of public institutions and bureaucracy and welfare, he's seeing it from a perspective of Western nations embarking on this kind of neo-colonial project of trying to modernize other nations to make them more compatible with the world market. And that means that, it's a disruption of the communities that already existed there. And the ways of thinking and the ways of learning and the ways of working that were associated with them. So when he really has this vicious attack on public institutions, it's about how they don't serve the purpose that they purport to serve,
right?
Because they have this warped understanding of education.
Yeah.
And later in the books, we're jumping ahead now, but he distinguishes between manipulative institutions and convivial institutions, and I think that is pretty central to what he's trying to get at. But I was reading this morning there was also another book published of after Deschooling What.
Okay.
And there were a lot of responses to Illich's initial project. And he does talk about how different factions within North America specifically are really glad to hear this critique of the public schooling system or public funding for those kinds of schools, because it kind of aligns with their own agenda, but doesn't have the same results that Illich is aiming for. And I think he talks about it in terms of superficial solutions. So I think when it comes to the more conservative critiques of institutionality, he thinks, well, these sorts of factions or kind of ideologues proposing solutions that don't address the real problem.
Yeah.
They're shifting it elsewhere, because if you draw funding out of it and don't provide a substantial basis for kind of de-schooled education, then just abandon people rather than really fulfilling their needs.
Yeah. And the one way that he kind of inoculates his project from being read as in that way is when he evokes Castro, who has that one passage where Castro says, Castro talks as if he wanted to go in the direction of deschooling when he promises that by 1980 Cuba will be able to dissolve its university, since all of life in Cuba will be an educational experience, which is kind of a funny way to think about it. And I read it essentially the same way as you're saying, where Illich wants to dissociate the thought of education from schools, where it's not necessarily a matter of schools being something that are threatening in their own right, but it's our kind of implicit, unwavering support of them as being our educators, or being the zones in which we are educated. Just as he's not necessarily opposed to the idea of health or the idea of zones of getting healthy, but how we associate hospitals with health, or whatever have you, or police with safety, or anything like that. And we'll get into the institutional stuff, as we go. But yeah, to just kind of to affirm what you said there. But one of the other things that he notices about the school is that it is particularly good at creating distinctions between both the rich and the poor, not only between those that actually can afford to go to school in many Latin American countries where schooling is kind of enforced upon them, but within the school itself, where rich children are kind of, when they're put among other poor children, there are frictions that occur. And the school fosters these kinds of distinctions and these kind of class struggles, or these issues in which the poor people always get the short end of the stick, right? Schools where in poorer communities get the fewest resources, and which doesn't fly under the radar of Illich's analysis here, because it could be read that, well, how could you be in support of any kind of schooling? Why are you suddenly in favor of having better resources for some schools? And that's just kind of, I'm trying to articulate that he's not necessarily opposed to the idea of schooling per se, but in the number of problems associated with it.
From my recollection, what he talks about with the division between rich and poor students is his emphasis on the fact that a lot of learning happens outside of the school.
Yeah.
And if you're more economically secure, then your parents can, have the job security and the free time because, they work 9 to 5 and they can come back in the evening and they can read to you from books, or you can afford to go on holiday. Whereas if you're in a more economically precarious situation, your parents might not be entirely present. They might be totally exhausted from their work, and they don't have the free energy to devote any time to your own their children's betterment, because just that's how that's how capitalism works. But I think that as a way of puncturing the illusion that school is the great equalizer.
Exactly.
Because there is time outside of school and there are circumstances outside of school where people benefit from their place in the economic hierarchy, and that feeds into the aims of education that are embedded in the school system, because it's all about. To progress through the school system, you need to have an obligation to have already earned diploma or all the certification to gain access to the next stage. From middle school, you need to get the right grades to go to the right high school, and from the right high school, you go to the
and
right
it's mandatory.
sixth form. It's mandatory.
There are laws.
You can never just suddenly slip into university after not going to high school.
Yeah, and isn't that interesting as well, where it hits a point where there are certain laws not only about making sure people actually show up to school, but about keeping certain people out of it as well.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I remember something that my ex-landlords, actually no, I used to call him my landfather, because I lived with, I was a lodger for a couple, and they took on a parental role because I was just entirely new to the city and I didn't know anyone. So I felt impersonal to call them my landlord or landlady, so I just called them my landparents. So my landfather was saying something about how he would love to teach history and choose the curriculum to teach the students, and he knew that would only really be possible if you were to become a university professor, and for that you'd have to go through. He was an engineer, so he had no formal academic training, despite being very vastly knowledgeable about military history specifically, but also economic history secondarily. But he would have to go through getting a BA and an MA and then a PhD to be in a position to teach the kind of classes that he would want. Whereas Illich takes that kind of hierarchy of qualification away in some of the proposals he makes later in the book. But he definitely... let me take a different tact.
Well, he says
he talks about learning and the assignment of social roles being fused together in schooling,
right.
And this feeds into the problem of only becoming an educator once you've had the right for qualification or progressing to later stages in the school system because of those previous qualifications, because that is your social role.
Yeah,
your social role is the certification that you have to justify your own knowledge.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what you actually know. It only matters what we can measure.
Exactly.
Does that make sense?
What the school has recognized you capable of, so that you can teach in the school.
Oh yes,
right.
Indeed, yeah.
So in he puts it in this way, which I think summarizes that idea well, where he says large universities make the futile attempt to match them by multiplying their courses, and they generally fail since they are bound to curriculum, course structure, and bureaucratic administration.
Right.
So there is a little bit of that fantasy, and I mean, we could look at us. We're still taking courses after how many years have we been in the institution?
I've taken years out, but I mean, I think all in all, this is coming to my 6th year of post-secondary education.
Yeah.
I was just like, well, I now qualify to be a legitimate teaching assistant.
That's exactly it. Yeah. That's exactly it. And I think he puts it extremely well, just following that point where he says the alternative, giving us kind of giving us a sneak peek at what he'll get to, where he says that the most radical alternative to school would be a network or service which gave each man the same opportunity to share,
in a universal sense.
Yes, the universal man, his current concern with others motivated by the same concern. Now, if we think of schooling in, say, primary school or secondary school, what we see in those situations is no opportunity for anyone to actually bring to the table their own interests.
Oh gosh, the sparkling water really erupted there.
Don't worry, that wasn't a bomb or anything. It was the sparkling water.
Yeah.
But
needs to get hydrated somehow.
For people in mandatory schooling, they aren't allowed to bring to the table anything that they would find interesting themselves. Rather, it's about them among their however many 30 peers or other students.
Indeed.
They have to learn the exact same thing, which doesn't at all allow for any kind of, individual expression when it comes to what one learns. And I remember, to be anecdotal about this, I took a stab at teaching high school for a little while in the country somewhere. And one of the big things was that students just didn't want to be there. And I happened to be teaching a course that was kind of like individually planned courses. I don't know what the actual
that sounds very neoliberal. I mean, just individually planned courses.
Like it was there, yeah. But one of the things was that many of the students just didn't want to be there. They wanted to be at home working on their farm, literally. Yeah. Like that's what they wanted to do. And I was like, why can't they do that? Like they're like 16, 17-year-old people. Like, there aren't kids. Yeah. Like, why do they have to be here doing this? Like, if they go and work on their farm, they're gonna make a hell of a lot more money than going through school and going through debt. And
when did you start caring about school? Like, actually, no. So, I mean, considering that we're talking in Illich's terminology, when did you start caring about your own education?
When I think only when I really hit grad school.
Really?
Wow. University, my undergrad was I enjoyed it a lot, but I really did love it as far as the content went, as far as the stuff I was learning, but I didn't put myself into it as much as I could have. I was seeking the opportunity to do the bare minimum that would still grant me decent grades. But it was only when I hit grad school and I said, I gotta be in this because I actually want to be here. Like, really. And it helps that, we kind of get paid to do it too, to some extent. Thank you, Canada. Well, in the States, they get more money. But in some cases. But yeah, I don't know. What about you?
But it also costs more money.
Yeah, exactly.
I was at 17.
17? Do you know the month?
No, pretty much turning 17. 17 years. It was just the point where I started to fall in love with books.
Oh,
and with ideas, and I started to do independent reading outside of my classes, and to become interested in intellectual history. But before then, I was very much the same as you, of trying to do the complete minimum to pass classes. And I mean, for my high school, I took what was it? It was like a drama, music, history, and geography. And the only reason I took geography as one of my main elective classes was because my mother said I couldn't do art. I couldn't do like music, drama, and art, and then history. But those were the things that really encouraged me, and that were drama and music. And I never felt like school in the same way. I would just sort of go for music class. I would go into this secret little corridor that led outside the music department and down to the fire exit, and just sort of fiddle around on a guitar and fiddle around on a keyboard and try to figure out how different harmonies work, how you could combine chords with melodies. And with drama, I'd just be there writing scripts all the time. I went to drama school for my undergraduate, so a lot of that learning was, just kind of a fusion of my enthusiasms. I think that's the experience that Illich wants people to encounter.
Yeah,
he wants people to be really wrapped up in their learning, and to do it on a more voluntary and intentional basis. He feels like anything that comes across as unquestioned, as an obligation, should be re-examined.
Yeah.
I think there was this great quote in the book that has this kind of strange resonance with what we're doing right now. About it's connected to the idea of the sort of network that he imagines that will connect people. That will connect people according to a common interest,
yep.
where they can meet and discuss something, and it's usually reduced to something very, very simple.
Mm-hmm.
Because he talks about, this is quoting Illich right now, the idea of matching by title is thus radically different from the theory on which the Great Books Club, for example, were built. Instead of relying on the selection by some Chicago professors, any two partners can choose any book for further analysis.
Right, yeah.
So it's like, it's as simple as walking over to someone in the bar, and it depends which bar you're in, and saying, like, what are you reading at the moment?
Yeah.
And it's just great to, come across someone who's sort of reading or has read the same thing as you, where it's kind of not necessarily represented in the formal institutions of education in the same way. Yeah,
they certainly, It is determined what you read far in advance. Before your interest could possibly take over at any point, and determine for you what you would want to do. So what I have trouble with the idea, not because I disagree, but when I think of the concept of the phenomenology of school, I think of it because phenomenology is such a, in my mind, such a slippery concept. I often get confused with it, and I've taken the time. I've read Husserl and Merleau-Ponty, and it's like,
and when you reach this chapter, you're like, but where is the phenomenology?
Yeah. I'm like, okay, are we dealing with the topic of, and I had it explained to me once in a pretty simple way. I asked a friend of mine, like, what is phenomenology? And he was like, it's the study of appearances.
Oh yeah, that's like just basic definition.
And I was like, okay, but then
but
you
which
get into,
one?
like,
how?
Then you get into like feminist phenomenology, and then suddenly it becomes a whole thing about embodiment in the body and how bodies are excluded or included or anything like that. And I'm thinking, holy God, what the hell does Illich mean by that here? And I don't know if you have an answer, because I don't.
I'm baffled by the way he's talking about the phenomenology of school. And I don't know. Okay, this is going to be like a far-fetched interpretation.
Well,
maybe it's like a reference to Hegel's phenomenology of spirit.
I think that's what he was doing.
It's about this like kind of dialectic of where you have these concepts of, like, the three main points in the phenomenology of school is there's age, there's the teachers and the pupils and full-time attendance.
Right.
And later in the book, he talks about the general education of new formal educative institutions, and it's just all these solutions that basically counter what he talks about in the phenomenology of school. Because what page is it? I have terrible handwriting, so my notes are always useless. So first point in the phenomenology of school is age,
right?
And the 3 points of that is, the largest point is that school groups people according to age, and it's based on 3 premises. Children belong in school, children learn in school, and children can only be taught in school. And then he addresses that much later, of saying that a good educational system should provide all who want to learn with access to available resources at any time in their lives.
Right.
The second point in the phenomenology of school is that it divides people into relations of teachers and pupils. And when he comes to the characteristics later in the book, he says a good educational system should empower all who want to share what they know to find those who learn it, who want to learn it from them. So this is a way of addressing the teacher-pupil division. And then the third point is full-time attendance. And he talks about the 3 roles of teacher in this section. If there's teacher as custodian, teacher as moralist, and teacher as therapist. Let's actually go back to that point, because I think it'd be good to discuss what he means by that. Teacher as custodian is a way of the teacher leading the pupil through the ceremony or ritual of education.
Yeah.
It's the process of, like, when you go through different grades, the teacher is still teaching the same curriculum, unless, like, the government has changed it. Thanks, Doug Ford. The teacher as moralist is basically the teacher as authority. The teacher is working the place of God or the parents or the church or things like that. So this is why you're scared of your teacher. Or if you want to be a rebel as a teenager, you rebel against the teacher, because the teacher occupies a position as the moralist. And then the teacher as therapist. It's a way of convincing the student that if you learn this thing, your life will become better.
Right.
Or and the way that teachers in high school, if you were being naughty, is like, well, I'm just trying to do what's best for you.
Yeah.
I'm trying to teach you the things that you need to know as you go through life.
Yeah.
You won't have a calculator in your pocket when you're trying to figure out these math sums. Didn't anticipate smartphones. And then, to address full-time attendance, Illich is like, furnish all who want to present an issue to the public with the opportunity to make their challenge known. So the attendance isn't obligatory, it's not all the time, it's addressed these specific issues, these specific challenges, these specific ideas. So when he's setting them out in the phenomenology of school, it could be thought about as a dialectical process, where he's talking about how the idea of education at the moment is corrupted in these material forms of the school. And if you go through the process of coming to like a better educational system, these ideas will be fulfilled.
Yeah.
If we de-school society, if we take away like the corrupt material forms.
Yeah.
Of what it's doing. So maybe it's just like an allusion to that title. Another interpretation would be like, this is how people day to day experience school.
Right.
Like, you're a child.
Sure, yeah.
You're a pupil, and there's a teacher, and you have to go there every day. So I think he might be using phenomenology in just the terms of like day to day experience.
Yeah.
But he's definitely not talking about it in like the way that anyone else talks about phenomenology.
No. Which is why it's interesting.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing I take from this chapter is the construction of the thing called childhood. And the assumption
that childhood belongs to the bourgeoisie.
Because it seems as though, and I think Illich would agree, that society is not interested in schooling adults in the school. Like, there are other institutions that'll take care of that.
Well, and also it's seen as a source of embarrassment.
Yeah, exactly. And why is that? Oh, we talk for hours about that, I'm sure. But because those children, in their being young, the one qualifier I will attach to them, they haven't been institutionalized yet. So what is the best way to indoctrinate virtually everyone? And Althusser has the exact same...
Oh, yeah, indeed.
The exact same remark. He's like, in order to push ideology down people, put them through school.
Yeah.
Education, that's the best way. And it seems as though this is only really possible for Illich if we've established certain, axiomatic conditions pertaining to there being this thing called childhood, and that those people that have gone through the school system and have been institutionalized or taught to be institutional teachers are therefore more intelligent and therefore in a position to teach these stupid, uninstitutionalized blobs, right? Mm-hmm. So it doesn't give us an answer to this thing called phenomenology, but...
Oh, yeah, indeed.
No, it's...
There's a interesting concept that gets picked up in After Deschooling Watch. And it gets expanded a bit more. I mean, he really mentions it at the end of this chapter of the hidden curriculum.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
This hidden curriculum of schooling adds prejudice and guilt to the discrimination which a society practices against some of its members, and compounds the privilege of others with a new title to condescend to the majority. Just as inevitably, this hidden curriculum serves as a ritual of initiation into a growth-oriented consumer society for rich and poor alike.
Right.
So it's... I mean, to go back to the point that he makes about students from poorer backgrounds, from poorer nations, they are always placed in a position of inferiority to the better schooled. And this is where the prejudice and guilt comes from. I feel guilty because I didn't take advantage of the education that was offered to me that would grant me access to these higher echelons of education.
Supposedly.
And
yeah.
The prejudice comes from you only have your high school diploma.
Yeah. You
are inferior.
Yeah, exactly.
He talks about this later with the idea of institutional values.
Yeah.
But that belief in the value of institutionalized values comes from school.
Yeah.
It comes from the superiority you feel when you get a better grade from someone else.
Yeah.
It comes from the superiority you feel when you know that your level of education is higher than someone else. Where you're higher in the hierarchy of the university. I mean, this is... I think it would be an interesting conversation to have about superiority and seniority in institutions, because he does mention the sense that people who were educated before other people may feel a sense of inferiority about not hearing about the latest trends or the most recent forms of knowledge. That doesn't really match my experience, I think.
Right.
People can be very dismissive of new forms of thinking about things.
Like in education, like
in education.
University.
Yeah, I think in the university definitely.
Yeah, well, we can certainly think about the way that current political rhetoric has taken aim at the university, especially, but education.
Well, I think it's interesting that some people on the right talk about conservatism as the new counterculture.
Yeah, exactly.
Rather than being like conservatism is just conservatism. Yeah. It needs to be packaged in the sense of being the rebel against the machine.
Yeah.
Which it doesn't belong there, but it needs to be packaged like that. It needs to be. Let me think about this for a second. I mean, why do they make that move? They make that move because they want to seem as if their insights are new, and they're fighting the establishment, because no one unless you're the establishment, no one like enjoyably supports the establishment.
Right.
Everyone sympathises with the underdog, I think. So this is a way of winning hearts. But for Illich, this is before that whole. I don't know. We lived in crazy times. So I think it would be interesting to rewrite Deschooling Society for today, and really emphasise the point that emphasise the distinction that Illich has between just sort of, getting rid of school and Deschooling Society.
Right.
Because, ironically, in neoliberalism, the institutions that deregulate public institutions are still institutions.
Yeah.
So our lives are still determined by institutions. It's just that they package themselves in the rhetoric of liberty and free market trade and all of those other buzzwords that came from the Chicago school. And it doesn't do the same task as Illich was intending, or Protloff for it. I mean, like all of these people, I mean, they would have seen through that in an instant and gone, "This is just bullshit."
Yeah.
It's pure ideology on a certain extent, to a certain extent of like the things that you're talking about. It just doesn't match what you're actually doing.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'll backpedal a bit.
Sorry.
I want to think.
I think I may have gone on a total rant. So I'm sorry about that.
No, that was good. I'm also curious about this, and it's a good segue into the third chapter. Thinking about the ritualization of progress. How are and various myths, right? So as we were saying it earlier, or speaking about it, it was about the myth of progress, or the myth of the way that going through school somehow attaches more significance to your mental capability than someone who hasn't made it as far, or someone who's dropped out. And for my own part, I had a very odd experience, or a very odd thing happened to me, where as soon as I hit grad school and I was standing up in front of people in like a TA setting, I was able to recall information. I was able to explain things in a more coherent manner than I'd ever have before. Yeah. And all of a sudden I thought, holy shit, like, is this so much that I've actually learned all of these things through my undergrad? Or is it that I've been essentially bestowed with this title of, crappy title of teaching assistant, that suddenly...
And a crappy paycheck of teaching assistant.
Crappy paycheck, exactly. That I suddenly internalized the rules required of me, internalized the duties required of me. Again, not because I've learned them, but because I've been effectively institutionalized to the point that if I am given that if I'm placed in that position, I will accommodate it. I've been effectively sent through the factory of schooling, and they can then play the part. I don't know if you had a similar experience.
I think that you're too... I think that you feel like you're too integrated within the machine. I think at that point you're no longer in a position of conditioned inferiority.
Right, but then it would just be conditioned superiority.
Yeah, exactly. At the same time, you're now in this particular condition where you are educating the people who are ignorant, who are not necessarily ignorant either, or you're teaching your interest to the people who are supposedly uninterested. It's a strange shift. But it's a power dynamic.
Oh, yeah.
Because the students... Well, unless there's someone among them who has, seen through the veil. The students listen to you because in these institutions, the professor knows more, or the lecturer knows more than the students, so you're there to learn. even if you think what the lecturer is saying is bullshit, or you don't necessarily agree with it, you do respect their position within the academy. I think this is not an experience. This is an experience that doesn't stop or it doesn't fade away. I think there are definitely like professors who are teaching like grad level seminars who occasionally feel like frauds. I mean, there's like the famous, well, I mean, I don't know how many people know this, but like Christopher Hitchens would often talk about like how he feels like he's got away with something. And, like there'll just come a moment where like he'll be fined from Vanity Fair because people are like, actually no, we didn't really, we have realised that you're not actually a good journalist or not actually a good writer. But you can balance that experience with an institutional role or institutional influence.
Yeah.
And I think that in this book, and maybe in person, Illich would like go to you and say, David, you do know this stuff.
Yeah.
You don't need to do it here. You don't need to teach people here. Look at some of these people. They're checking their phones. People are not interested in this. Find people who are interested and share what you know with them.
That's why I do this.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's actually where education is more exciting and more engaging in comparison to obligatory classes.
Yeah, for sure.
And I mean, it doesn't really talk about tuition either, which is interesting, I think.
Talk about what?
Tuition.
Tuition, yeah.
I mean, I guess this is because it's in a different time where tuition fees aren't discussed as like a preventative factor of people entering.
No,
education.
He has that one little comment though about how in a certain time, right? Before that, the university protected an individual's freedom of speech, but did not automatically convert his knowledge into wealth. To be a scholar in the Middle Ages meant to be poor, even a beggar.
Yeah.
So, right, he isn't talking about tuition, but he is making a comment there as to, how, at a time, there was a time when learning something required someone to give up a lot. Like, you had to sacrifice, right?
It's like you look at some people who I come from, drama school and art school, so a lot of people I know are like just very poor.
Yeah.
And doing what I love, and so I get that sense of like having a calling, which is different from getting a schooling. When I think about I was thinking about this earlier, like who is the people that come to mind when I think about getting a schooling, and I think about the Ivy Business School here at Western.
Yeah,
they're here to get a degree that translates into economic value immediately.
Yeah.
And it translates into economic value as soon as you graduate, because it's embedded in neoliberal institutions that an MBA makes you more appealing to employers than people who just have a BA.
Yeah. Or
like an MA in theory and criticism. I'm sorry to dunk on you, David.
That's
but there is a way of like assessing the value of different graduate degrees. That's talking about like that relates to what Illich thinks about like the institutionalization or measurement of different values, or the measurement of institutionalized values. Let's put it like that.
So that'd be the first and the second myths, where it goes institutional values, or the myth of institutional values, which would be like the idea that just by going through school, you're actually learning things, but you're really learning about institutional life. Then the myth of measurement of values, where he says that personal growth is not a measurable entity.
I mean, why he has this juxtaposition between institutionalized values and disciplined dissidents.
Right.
So he's not like one of these sort of airy-fairy hippies of like anything goes, we'll just take acid and fuck each other. He's like, no, I trained with monks. I understand this concept of disciplined dissidence. It can't be measured against any rod or any curriculum, and it can't be compared to someone else's achievement. Think about how much in our lives that experience is just embedded in us because we went through the schooling system.
Yeah.
We feel better than someone else because we got better grades or have a better institution, or even if we have like degrees of the same name, our institution that we graduated from is better than theirs.
Exactly.
And it's always this the sense that the value that's attributed to us is comparable to someone else. So this is a way of kind of dropping out of the valuing, the evaluating of institutions, and it can't be. And disciplined dissidence can only be enacted through imaginative endeavour,
right?
Whatever that means, but it sounds great. And disciplined dissidence is immeasurable. No measurement is possible here. Recreation is bringing out the idea of leisure. Is also connecting it with how human beings are stamped or impressed with the divine.
Yeah.
So this is the idea of creation. I mean, to look at it in a more secular way, it's the artistic, it's the expressive, it's the emotional, and how that is integral to our lives, and with schooling, if someone has submitted to schooling, then unmeasured experience just slips out of their hands.
Yeah,
because they don't know how to capture it, and they don't think that they're allowed to. Because to do something like that means to drop out. Means to take a random turn. It means to be a nonconformist. And nonconformism has become more of an accepted or celebrated value,
right?
Since Illich was writing.
And those people, as he says, that those people that drop out, where he says that the dropout who is forever reminded of what he missed, and the graduate who is made to feel inferior to the new breed of student know exactly where they stand in the ritual of rising deceptions and continue to support a society which euphemistically calls the widening frustration gap a revolution of rising expectations.
Where is this section? Is this the section, the myth of the
self-perpetuating progress? Yeah, exactly.
Indeed. So I mean, if it is, he's talking about the myth of everything is getting better, everything is getting more right,
right. Yeah.
Everything is getting more sophisticated.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not participating, then you're not welcome to the party. And I think Illich is suggesting that it's telling you it's not a great party.
No, no. Well, that's it, and that's
and there are better places to go, and better things to do, and we should make our own party.
And that's how he kind of equates it with the idea of a kind of world religion to some extent, where it takes on, as he says, as Max Weber traced the social effects of the belief that salvation belonged to those who accumulated wealth. We can now observe that grace is reserved for those who accumulate years in school.
Yeah.
Which is, I think it speaks certainly volumes to that.
Wow. I mean, it's classic Illich. There's also the line in the section on the coming kingdom, the universalization of expectations of the school. It's the idea that how do I put this? I mean, it's an allusion to the last days, and everyone who's a true believer will be accepted up to heaven. And he thinks that it's an analogy between everyone thinking that if they just participate in enough school, then they'll be able to be involved in this paradise of the meritocracy, I guess. But he's talking about the seeds of meritocracy as it's meritocracy as it's emerging in the United States and Europe, and will become more established under neoliberalism, but in a hollow way. So here he's talking about that. The school-induced expectation of the kingdom, on the other hand, is impersonal rather than prophetic, and universal rather than local. Man has become the engineer of his own messiah,
right,
and promises unlimited rewards of science to those who submit to progressive engineering for his reign. So, I mean, there's a certain sense of profanity and hubris to what people are trying to accomplish with institutions and with schooling. And I know that you're pretty paganistic. So I wonder what you felt about these religious overtones into Illich's work at certain points.
Well, it is very apparent that he's a thoroughgoing
Catholic. I mean, his Catholicism is showing at this point, definitely.
Yeah, and
no, sorry, just to interrupt you. But this also comes into play when he's talking about the Prometheus myth. The final chapter. It's like, don't fuck with the gods, because they'll fuck with you, and they'll fuck with you worse. And in his context, he's talking about there is this sacred order that we inherit from the medieval time period that really underlies all of our concepts about ourselves. If we mess up this shit, it could go really wrong.
Yeah.
And I think at this point, this is where we're talking about, like, in the 21st century, where we are at the moment, like, it can go into eco-fascism, it can go into, like, transhumanism, and I mean, well, it can just go into fascism generally. So I mean, I was curious about what you thought about the clearly theological echoes in
but he has an interesting kind of theological perspective where it seems to me as though he would be as reticent to accept the idea of a kind of world religion or a world institution through which we can attain our relationship to God or through something like that.
Yeah, no, I think that's true.
So I think that there are, if we consider the relationship between schooling and education, and then between church and God, we can draw a similar parallel where he wants to get at those institutional formations, keeping in mind that education and God aren't the problem in these cases.
Well, that's reminded me of other stuff that I've read, and I should have thought about that earlier. But he wrote this paper in the 90s. I can't remember what it was called, but he talked about the lay literacy.
The what?
The lay literacy.
What is that?
In the sense of like the layman.
Oh, okay.
As opposed to the priest.
Oh, I see.
As opposed to the priesthood. So when he's talking about literacy, he's talking about lay literacy.
I see.
And how it is not institutionalized, how it's not tied up with a specific role. And so he writes about information technologies as a threat to lay literacy. Because information technologies don't seem to equip people with the same knowledge or methods to challenge authority in the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that in that sense, he would ascribe, I think he uses this language in several places, but the priesthood to teachers. Oh!
What is that?
That sounds like a motorcycle. If he would probably compare the priesthood to teachers in schools and lay literacy, the people who are engaging in like the networks where people come together over a book that interests them to discuss it.
Right, and that brings up another interesting point where he, keeping in mind these possibilities of engaging in an anti-school kind of schooling or non-school schooling.
Deschooling.
He says right out, like pretty plainly, liberation from the grips of school could be bloodless in the way that you and I are doing it now, or how he explains almost like a dating app where people who have similar interests
that's very much like that.
could just go with that. But he also has another interesting point about Marxists, or about neo-Marxists, a very popular term.
Oh yeah, indeed.
Where he says that...
Are you talking about... this is a strange interpretation of Illich as like the proto-Jordan Peterson.
Okay. I wasn't going to make... you said it, I didn't say it.
Well, I mean, he's the spectre that haunts our conversations. Continue.
Yeah, he looks like a ghost. So what he says is that this is often...
he becomes one soon.
Yeah. Oh, shit. I'm going to get the hate, man. What he says... This is often forgotten by neo-Marxist analysts who say that the process of deschooling must be postponed or bracketed until other disorders, traditionally understood as more fundamental, are corrected by an economic and political revolution. What do you make of that?
Well, it's just like him talking about scientists like socialists or vulgar Marxists who are like, no, what you don't understand is that the superstructure can't be changed unless we change the base. They're two different things.
Yeah.
And they don't, and they only interact in very minor ways. And it's just like, well, you don't. I mean, guys. You do realize that the way that this current society gets people to support the base is through the superstructure.
Right.
If you want people to change the base, we need to start with the superstructure.
Right.
Because I mean, it's easier to infiltrate the superstructure under capitalism, because to infiltrate the base, you need a hell of a lot of money. And at that point, I'm sorry, but you're a capitalist.
Right. And wasn't there that moment with Gramsci where he saw the workers take over the factories and they didn't know what to do with them? Like, what do we do with this? Just give them back? I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's...
But it is a sense of like, just... I mean, people... people spend a lot of time in their minds. Even if they spend a lot of time working with their bodies. I think that it is just important to consider, why do people think what they think, or what they believe.
Yeah.
And it was just like, well, I mean, it's obvious that, certain forms of belief and certain forms of thinking, like, feed into institutionalization. It describes social roles to people. It brings this hierarchy between who goes off to be a teacher, who goes off to be a worker, and whose children ends up being taught by the teacher. And this society ascribes different values to that. So really, if we want to, I mean, deschooling will never completely address the dynamics of class struggle.
Yeah,
obviously, but it means that they are more exposed.
Mm-hmm.
I think. I think this is why he's talking about myths and ritual, because myth and ritual cloak. And so to take those things away means that the cloaking devices of capital are removed.
Right.
I don't think we can never really have an unmediated relation to capital. I mean, Marx understood that you had to engage in abstraction to actually understand, the commodity or exchange value, which are like very integral parts of the way that capitalism functions. But like the less bullshit you have to deal with, the better that you can really get to understand what's happening, I think. But as like Illich says, I mean, like, deschooling is really the root of any movement of human liberation.
Yeah.
And so you need to change people's minds before you change people's lives. Because at that point, you're like, but people will change their lives themselves.
Yeah, that's a good place to... We'll stop this one here, and we'll continue it in a minute. So, yeah, for anyone who wants to keep listening to this, check out the next one.
How far are we in?
An hour and 9 minutes.
An hour and 9 minutes? Oh, man, I should have brought 2 bottles of wine.
Well, you still have the white.
Yeah, I still have the white, indeed, but who knows? I mean, it might be, a 4 hour and
no, we'll
we'll cut off at the 3 hour mark. Okay.
Yeah, we'll cut off this